Good evening, sir. Good evening, everyone. We are the Group 4. We are going to discuss about on how to carry out the following maintenance. What are the tools and materials to be used? What are the necessary precautions that should be carried prior, during, and after maintenance? About piston overhaul of main propulsion engine, piston overhaul of diesel engine, taking crankshaft deflection for diesel engine, and replacing a leaking mechanical seal of main engine lube oil pump. Before we start, I would like to introduce you my members. So first, I am Engine Cadet Roma KLARC Mathew. Together with my members, Engine Cadet Keith Ortega, Engine Cadet ESCUADRO, Engine Cadet William Butantan, and Engine Cadet Joseph MADAITON. So the first to present will be Engine Cadet Keith Ortega.
Thank you, Engine Cadet Roma. So, the first topic we tackle about is piston overhaul of main propulsion engine. So, first is, what is overhaul? So, overhaul is to completely renovate and making major changes in order to repair. A few shutters and new coat of paint won't come close to fixing the old boarded up house. It needs complete overhaul. So, before commencing the overhaul, so first is shut off starting air and lock it off. Second, open the indication cocks. Cool down the engine sufficiently to allow lube oil pumps to be shut down. Isolate fuel cooling water. Next is work discussion. Toolbox meeting must be carried out to ensure that all participants read the manuals and familiarize with the procedures, safety precaution, and make recommendation. Next is to ensure each person knows his task. And last is confirm required spare or are on board. So next is check the lifting tools, strap, shackles, etc. are within certification in good order. Then, check the jack are in good condition with no leaks. Next is to ensure permission for immobilization is given. Next is carry out risk assessment. Next is ventilate the crankcase and obtain permit to work. Next is to ensure that no one else is working elsewhere on the engine and could be potentially harmed or harm others. Next is check that no one is working in the vicinity of the shafting system and propeller and that the bridge have confirmed that it is safe to turn the engine. So, overhaul procedure. Here are the overhaul procedure. So, first is drain the cylinder, cooling water from the respective cylinder. So, note, it is not advisable to just drain down the liner level in case that the liner is disturbed with the lifting the piston. Next is to remove cylinder head and associated with pipework. Next is turn engine to BDC and remove carbon and wear ridge from cylinder liner using grinder. Next is unbolt the piston rod from the crosshead. Next is two-piece spacer tube is bolted to the piston rod to protect the piston rod gland with lifting the piston. Next is unbolt the gland housing. The piston rod gland is removed with the piston rod. Next is turn the crank to TDC. Top dead center. Then next is the spacer tube will push the piston rod gland out of its settings. So next is clean out the threaded holes in. Next is bolt the lifting bracket. And lastly is lift the piston rod and gland with the engine crane and lower the assembly into the special cradle for maintenance. So next to present is Engine Cadet Clark Mateo Roma.
Thank you, Engine Cadet. Kit Ortega. So can you please next the slide? So to continuation, once mounted in the cradle, the piston should be cleared and all deposits removed. The piston rings are removed using correcting expanding tool. Inspect the ring grooves for wear on bottom landing surface. A profile gauge is used to check that the crown has not burnt excessively, which would thin and weaken it. If the burning is excessive, the cause is often poor fuel injection. Investigate and replace the crown. The crown of the piston must be inspected very carefully for evidence of cracking. Cracking is caused by excessive thermal stressing due to poor cooling and carbon buildup or excessive mechanical stress overloading. The contact faces of the ring and the skirt are expected for sign of abrasion and scuffing, which indicates poor filtration of fuel oil or air and poor cylinder lubrication. Excessive wear of the skirt may indicate misalignment or excessive clearance of crosshead guides. Piston ring should be gauged and a decision based on manufacturer recommendation made as to whether to replace them. Next, please. The piston is disassembled from the rod and the cooling spaces inspection once it reaches overhaul. Interval stated by marker. On oil, cold piston look for buildup of carbon deposit which could indicate overheating of the piston crown and contamination of hub oil by used cylinder oil. On a water-cooled piston, look for evidence of scale buildup due to incorrect water treatment. After assembly of piston, check that the cooling space is tight by applying a hydraulic test. Note, do not over pressurize. If new rings are to be fitted, check the axial clearance in the ring grooves and circumferential clearance by placing the ring into an worn part of the cylinder liner. During the piston overhaul, the stopping box normally overhauled, as well as segments must be inspected for wear, clearances, and spring to be measured according to the manual. Clean, measured, and possibly overhauled piston with stopping box inspected or overhauled is ready to be installed. Next, please. Prior installing the piston, measure and record the liner wear. Apply rings, guiding tools, and sufficient cylinder oil when lowering the piston. Bolt the connecting rod to the crosshead. Secure stuffing box. Install cylinder head and associated pipework. File the cooling space with water and check for any leakage from the outside and inside the engine. Start preheating the engine. Start loop oil circulation. Pre-lubricate and turn the engine with the turning gear. Next. Piston overhaul of diesel engine. Is this my report or
ESCUADRO.
maybe? So to continue my report, I would like to call Agent Cadet ESCUADRO.
Thank you very much, Engine Cadet Roma. So by the way, I'm Engine Cadet ESCUADRO Isare. So to continue, I will going to discuss about on how to piston overhaul of diesel engine. So the the piston frequency of piston drawing out check varies according to the daily maintenance. So especially the lubricating oil controlled and load. So it really matters of the lubrication system. And therefore, the supervisor is required to decide the proper frequency. And however, initial overhaul and check should be performed at the time mentioned in maintenance manual, which is around 8,000 to 10,000 running hours. From then on, decide the subsequent check schedule according to the overhaul checking results. So an increase of blow by and increase in lubricating oil consumption. And when the lubricating oil consumption has becoming twice the initial value, overhaul and clean the piston and replace the piston rings. So it really needs to this is the perfect time to overhaul the the piston, especially in the diesel engine. So next slide. So these are the so in performing of the in overhauling the piston of the diesel engine. This uh these are the preparation or the procedure in performing this in overhauling. So first, make sure that all standby auxiliaries engines are ready. So to in case of backup, all the auxiliary machineries are all ready. The next is read the manual and have a toolbox meeting with everyone involved in the job and discuss the complete procedure. So it really needs to have a meeting to set a plan before doing the task. The next is prepare important tools and spare required for overhauling liner or given in the manual. So before the meeting, before the making the plan, it next step uh, is to prepare the tools and the equipment that is used to replace or the spare parts that is needed to replace during the overhauling. The next is prepare risk assessment and make sure all personal safety equipment are used. So safety first is very essential. And fifth is go through the previous records manual for clearance and adjustments. Next is put the display card or the the main at work or don't start at lube oil pump and auxiliary engine breaker. So it is also essential for other crew or other co-workers to be noticed. And next is close air bottle valve to auxiliary engine and engine start and stop valve. And next, number 8 is see that the turning bar is not in the flywheel and should be in place. Number 9 is open the indicator cocks. And next is close lube oil, fuel oil, freshwater inlet and outlet valve, drain the cooling water line, and remove the connections. Next is lastly is when going out the piston, cover cover the crankshaft with a shaft within the crankcase. Uh, Next slide. So various procedures are the overhauling. First is screw the lifting eye bolt into the piston and lift it by 2 to 30 to 30 millimeter. So it is the procedure on how to lift to pull out the piston from the cylinder. And next is loosen the connecting rod bolts with the specified disassembling tool and then remove the bolts and metal cap. And third is set the piston at piston of about 30 degrees after the top dead center. And fourth, eliminate the carbon from the upper part of the. 80 to 90% before the top dead center. And 7 is to prepare the tools as per the man out tool 1 in the piston. And 9, place the tools so that outer taper faces towards the piston and do not allow it to make contact with the cylinder liner. And 10, attach the liner retaining implement 2 and spacer 3 and lock them with a cylinder head tightening knot. And 11, turn the flywheel and remove the protection ring. And lastly, remove the upper metal and draw out the piston. So in this procedure, the piston is already pulled out. Next slide. So next slide to present is Engine Cadet William Butantan.
Thank you, Engine Cadet Isare Escuadro. So, mainly two kinds of overhauling tools. The first is the testing tools. What are the testing tools? Testing tools from a software testing context can be defined as a product that supports one or more test activities right from planning, requirements, creating a build, test execution, defect logging, and test analysis. The next tool is servicing tools. The supply, installation, or maintenance of goods carried out by a dealer. Next slide, please. What are the tools and materials to be used? So the first is piston knurling tools. Second, piston ring expander. Third, piston ring compressor. Fourth, piston ring groove cleaning machine. Fifth, piston and rod aligning tools. Sixth, screwdriver. Seventh, pliers. Eighth, hammer. And lastly, stud remover. Next slide, please. Gauge tools and measuring tools. Filler gauge, dip gauge, dial gauge, limit gauge, height gauge, hole gauge, radius, and fillet gauge. Steel scale, micrometers, calipers, slide calipers, hook rule, dividers, and trommels. Next slide, please. What are the necessary precautions that should be carried prior, during, and after maintenance? The steps of 5S, sort, seri, or also known tidiness, remove unnecessary items from each area. Set in order, sit on, organize and identify storage for efficient use. Shine or cleanliness. Clean and inspect area regularly. And the fifth is sustain or discipline. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Taking crankshaft deflection for diesel engine. The crankshaft of a large compression ignition engine is a huge, bulky components usually built of a number of separate forgings interference fitted together, which should remain as straight as possible during operation, as otherwise it could lead to serious damage to the bearings and thence to the engine. Crankshaft is built up of crank webs, crank pins, and journals along its length and its weight. is supported by the main bearings at the journals. Over a period of time, as the engine keeps running, the wear in the bearings may not be uniform across the entire length of the crankshaft. That means the crankshaft will remain in the initial straight line but will get bent either upward or downwards to a slight degree, which may not be visible with the naked eye but could be sufficient to cause dangerous level of fatigue in the crank webs. Compression ignition engine crankshaft breakage or overbending, for example, may be the result of excessive bearing clearances. Next slide, please. So this is the crank web deflection. Turn the crankshaft in the normal running direction exception to be marked with an arrow. So if you open a crankshaft, you will use the an arrow to you will draw an arrow to every screw or part of the crankshaft you will open, so that if you will put it together again, you have the identification on how loosen or tighten you will do to that screw. Next slide, please. So the next slide will be discussed by Engine Cadet Madaiton.
So thank you, Cadet uh, William Butantan. So the connecting rod should also be sighted using a straight edge looking for straightness. Check the bearing surfaces for bright areas usually indicate excessive wear. The condition and wear of both big and little end bearings should be examined, and if wear is found excessive, the bearing shell should be renewed. The diameter of the crank pins should be calibrated by measuring them with a micrometer and recording the results, again looking for ovality. The crankshaft should be examined paying special attention to wear of the bearings and if good. Diameter of the main crankshaft fitted such as again the measurements journal of the engine and oil weight and dated swap of the next slide. Many main and big end bearings effectively cannot be repaired, so that when they are heavily scored or show signs of severe wear, they must be renewed. The diagnostic engineer will find the acceptable levels of wear for a given engine in the manufacturer's handbook. To measure the wear of a crankshaft or crank pin, a suitably sized micrometer is needed, and to make measurements of the inside of shell bearing, a ball-ended micrometer is necessary. Split shell bearing can be measured by bolting up the unit on the appropriate part of the crankshaft over a priority brand of plasticine material. Afterward, measuring the thickness of that and checking again against a charge applied with the material. Next slide. What are the necessary precautions that should be carried prior, during, after maintenance? So, what is the main purpose for taking diesel engine crankshaft deflections? So, crankshaft deflection readings are an excellent method of determining engine to drive alignment and main bearing wear. This should be taken in accordance with a planned maintenance system when engine survey is conducted. So, next slide. What are the things that must be inspected in the crankshaft? In the case of a new crankshaft, check for dimensions and run out with a previously used crankshaft. You'll also need to check for flaws or cracks. Inspecting the crankshaft before installation verifies its condition and allows you to avoid problems and or comebacks. Next. So, replacing a leaking mechanical seal of main engine lube oil pump. So, a mechanical seal is a device that is used to control leakage between a rotating shaft and liquid or gas-filled vessel. Its main responsibility is to control leakage. All seals leak, they have to, in order to maintain a fluid film over the entire mechanical seal phase. The leakage that comes at the atmospheric side is fairly low. The leakage of the hydrocarbon, for example, is measured by a voltmeter in parts or million. So next, how to carry out the following maintenance. So components for defects, the short answer is this. If there are any defects, don't work around them. Get another new seal. So clean the pump. Carefully clean the seal cavity in the pump, ensuring that the area of the free from dirt, corrosion, and pitting that might interfere with the stationary seat seal. Remove all old gasket material from casing and seal cap. Clean yourself. Be sure that you wash your hands after cleaning the pump and before opening the new seal kit. And even though your hands are clean, don't ever touch any meeting parts of the mechanical seal with your bare hands. Pretend that you're a surgeon and clean them carefully. So next. Next slide, please. What are the tools and materials to use the engine? Spiller wrench, torque wrench, rubber hammer or maul, set of flat screwdrivers, some emery cloth, sandpaper, silicone lubricant. So next, prior, during, and after maintenance. So removing the mechanical seal it is strictly forbidden to use the hand hammer and a flat shovel to avoid damage in the sealing components. If there is a mechanical seal at both ends of the pump, care must be taken during the disassembly process to prevent this from happening. For mechanical seals that have been worked, if the sealing surface moves when the gland is loose, the moving ring part should be replaced and should not be a retention for continued use because the original running track of the friction pair changes after loosening the seal of the contact surface easily destroyed. If the sealing element is banded by dirt or cohesive, the condensate should be removed before the mechanical seal is removed. Next. Next slide, please. So that's all.
So that's all
Thank
our
you.
report. So once again, we are the Group 4. Thank you and
Thank,
goodbye.